October in Portland meant constant drizzle, but tonight was different. Water came down in sheets so thick my windshield wipers could barely keep up. I'd been driving on autopilot for the last 20 minutes, my mind still replaying the surgery I'd just finished. The German Shepherd hadn't made it. Despite everything I'd tried, despite 3 hours of cutting and stitching and praying, his heart had stopped on my table at 2:47 in the morning. I pulled into my driveway and killed the engine, sitting there for a moment in the sudden silence. The house looked exactly as I'd left it 16 hours ago, dark and empty, a 2-story colonial that had belonged to my parents before the accident. 5 years later, and I still sometimes expected to see lights on in the kitchen, my mother's shadow moving past the window. The storm hadn't let up. I grabbed my bag from the passenger seat and made a run for the covered porch, getting drenched in the 10 seconds it took to cross from car to door. My scrubs were already soaked through from earlier, covered in blood and antiseptic, and now rainwater joined the mix. I needed a shower hot enough to burn the last 16 hours off my skin. That's when my headlights caught something on the concrete near the garage's side entrance. At first, I thought it was oil, maybe leaked from my car earlier. But the color was wrong. Too dark, too thick, spreading in a pattern that moved toward the door instead of pooling in place. I stood on the porch, keys in hand, staring at that stain. Every rational part of my brain screamed to go inside the house, lock the door, call the police. Let someone else deal with whatever had bled that much on my property. But I'd spent the last decade of my life learning to recognize injury, to assess damage, to understand the difference between survivable wounds and fatal ones. And that amount of blood, fresh enough that the rain hadn't completely washed it away, meant someone was hurt. Badly. I crossed back to my car and grabbed the flashlight I kept in the glove compartment. The beam cut through the darkness, following the trail. It led to the garage's side door, the one I never locked because Mrs. Patterson's orange tabby liked to hide in there during thunderstorms. The door hung slightly ajar. My heart hammered against my ribs as I pushed it open. The garage smelled like motor oil and old cardboard, familiar scents from a lifetime of parking in here. But underneath was something else, metallic and warm. More blood. I swept the flashlight across the space. Boxes I'd never unpacked after my parents died lined the walls, stacked next to my father's old workbench, and tools he'd never use again. And there, collapsed against the far wall between a pile of winter tires and a broken lawnmower, was a man. He was unconscious, head tilted back against the concrete, skin pale enough to look gray in the flashlight's beam. His clothes were expensive. I could tell that much even in their current state. The suit had probably cost thousands before it got shredded and soaked in blood. His white shirt was more red than white now, particularly around his left side where his hand pressed weakly against his abdomen. I should have run. Should have called 911 and let the professionals handle this. But my training kicked in before my common sense could catch up, and I was moving toward him, dropping to my knees in the spreading pool of blood on the concrete. Hey. I touched his shoulder, checking for a pulse at his neck. Strong enough, but too fast. Can you hear me? No response. His head lolled to the side when I touched him, and I got my first clear look at his face. Even unconscious and bleeding out, he was striking. Sharp cheekbones, strong jaw, black hair plastered to his forehead. The kind of face you'd see in a magazine spread, not collapsed in a stranger's garage. I forced myself to focus. Assessment first. Questions later. I peeled his hand away from the wound and used my pocket knife to cut away his shirt. The hole was small, neat. Entrance wound on the left side of his abdomen, maybe 3 inches above his hip bone. I rolled him slightly, checking for an exit wound. Nothing. The bullet was still in there. Okay, I said, though he couldn't hear me. You picked the right house to bleed out at. I'm good at this. I was. Just not usually with humans. The next part was a blur of action driven by muscle memory. I ran inside, grabbing the emergency medical kit I kept for wildlife rescues, the one that was definitely not legal for human use, but contained everything I needed. Sterile gloves, gauze, antibiotics meant for large animals, surgical tools that would get me arrested if anyone official found out. I also grabbed towels, bottled water, and the bottle of whiskey from the kitchen cabinet. Not for him. For me. Because my hands were shaking, and I needed them steady for what came next. Back in the garage, I set up my makeshift surgical field on the oil-stained concrete. The stranger hadn't moved, which was good. Easier to work on someone who wasn't thrashing around. I cut away the rest of his shirt, using water-soaked towels to clean the area around the wound as much as possible. The bullet had entered clean, but the internal damage was anybody's guess. I could see the edges of the wound tract, tissue torn and bleeding sluggishly. He'd already lost so much blood that his body was starting to shut down, preserving what was left for vital organs. If I didn't get that bullet out and stop the bleeding, he'd be dead within the hour. I'd done this procedure hundreds of times. On dogs hit by cars, cats shot by cruel neighbors, even a deer once that had stumbled into someone's backyard. The anatomy was similar. Not identical, but close enough. My hands stopped shaking once I started working. The whiskey helped. One shot burning down my throat before I snapped on the surgical gloves. Then it was just me and the wound and the steady process of saving a life. I irrigated the wound channel with sterile saline, watching the flow to gauge depth. The bullet had angled upward slightly, missing his intestines by what looked like less than an inch. Lucky. Absurdly lucky. I used the smallest forceps, probing carefully, feeling for metal. There, about 2 inches deep, lodged against muscle tissue. I worked it free slowly, carefully, trying not to cause more damage than the bullet itself had created. When it finally came loose, I dropped it into an empty coffee can with a metallic clink that seemed too loud in the silent garage. The bleeding increased once the bullet was out, but I'd expected that. Pressure first, then sutures. I packed the wound with gauze, pressing hard enough that the stranger groaned, the first sound he'd made since I'd found him. Good. Pain meant nerve function, meant he was still in there fighting. I worked fast after that, suturing layer by layer. Muscle first, then subcutaneous tissue, finally skin. My stitches were neat and precise, habits formed from years of veterinary surgery translating perfectly to this illegal operation on a complete stranger in my garage. By the time I finished, dawn was starting to break. Gray light filtered through the garage's single window, turning everything the color of old concrete. The stranger's color had improved marginally, his breathing steadier now that he wasn't actively bleeding to death. I'd started an IV line using equipment meant for dehydrated dogs, pumping fluids into him to replace what he'd lost. I sat back on my heels, surveying my work. The wound was closed, cleaned, dressed with proper bandages. I'd injected him with antibiotics strong enough to kill an infection in a 200-pound mastiff. His pulse was still too fast, but not dangerously so. If he made it through the next few hours without his organs shutting down, he'd probably survive. Probably. I needed to move him. Couldn't leave him bleeding on my garage floor where anyone could see through the window. The house was safer, more private. Using a technique I'd learned for moving injured horses, I maneuvered him onto a plastic tarp and dragged him across the garage, through the side door, into the mudroom that connected to my kitchen. He was heavy, pure muscle under that expensive suit, built like someone who spent serious time in a gym. By the time I got him onto the old couch in my living room, I was sweating despite the morning chill. I covered him with blankets, checked his pulse again, made sure the IV was still flowing properly. Then I just stood there, looking down at this stranger who'd chosen my garage to collapse in, and realized exactly what I'd done. I'd committed at least 3 felonies in the last 2 hours. Failure to report a gunshot wound, practicing medicine without a license, potentially harboring a criminal because people who got shot and crawled into random garages instead of going to hospitals were usually running from something. The gun. I'd forgotten about the gun. I went back to the garage and found it where it had fallen from his hand, a matte black pistol that looked military grade. I picked it up carefully, using a towel, and brought it inside, hid it in the hall closet behind winter coats I never wore. Evidence I should have left alone, but couldn't quite bring myself to throw away. Back in the living room, I collapsed into the armchair across from the couch where my patient slept. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving me hollow and shaky. My scrubs were stiff with dried blood, his and the German shepherd's mixed together in brown stains that would never come out. I should call the police. Should explain what happened, that I found him like this, that I only did what any doctor would do when confronted with a dying patient. But I didn't reach for my phone. because somewhere between finding him and digging a bullet out of his gut, I'd made a choice. Maybe it was the exhaustion talking, or the grief from losing the shepherd earlier, or 5 years of living alone in a house full of memories. Maybe I was just tired of following the rules that had gotten me exactly nowhere. I watched him breathe, chest rising and falling with steady rhythm now. Whoever he was, whatever he'd done to end up shot and bleeding in my garage, he was alive. I'd saved him. The sun came up properly, golden light spilling through the windows, highlighting the dark hair that fell across his forehead. Even unconscious and wounded, there was something about him that demanded attention. The straight nose, the angular jaw, the way his body seemed coiled with potential energy even in sleep. I wondered who would come looking for him, if they'd come looking, if anyone even knew he was here. My phone buzzed from my bag, probably the clinic wondering where I was. I had appointments starting in 3 hours. I should shower, change, pretend everything was normal, go to work, and treat sick cats and limping dogs, and not think about the unconscious stranger currently bleeding through my couch cushions. Instead, I pulled the blanket up higher over his shoulders and went to make coffee. Because apparently I was the kind of person who saved bleeding strangers now, who committed crimes before breakfast, who looked at a man she'd found dying and decided he deserved a chance. The coffee maker gurgled and hissed, filling the kitchen with familiar sounds. I stood at the window, watching neighbors start their morning routines. Mrs. Patterson retrieving her newspaper, Mr. Kim starting his car for his commute downtown. Normal people doing normal things. And here I was, with a gunshot victim on my couch and blood drying under my fingernails. I should have been terrified. Should have been planning my escape, my explanation, my defense, when this inevitably blew up in my face. But as I poured coffee into my father's old mug and looked at the stranger who'd invaded my garage, all I felt was a strange sense of calm, like I'd been sleepwalking through the last 5 years and had finally woken up. Whatever happened next, at least it would be something different, something real, something that mattered more than appointments and rent and the slow, grinding routine that had become my entire world. I carried my coffee back to the living room and settled into the armchair, keeping watch. His color continued to improve as morning stretched into afternoon. The IV bag emptied, and I replaced it with another. His vitals stayed stable. Hour by hour, his body fought its way back from the edge. And I sat there, 29 years old and suddenly a criminal, watching him breathe and wondering what name I'd given life back to. 36 hours passed in a strange suspension of reality. I'd called in sick to the clinic, something I never did, claiming a stomach bug that would keep me home for a few days. The lie tasted bitter, but necessary. I couldn't exactly tell Dr. Morrison that I was monitoring a gunshot victim's vitals in my living room. The stranger slept through the first day and most of the second. I changed his IV bags when they ran dry, checked his temperature every 4 hours, monitored the surgical site for signs of infection. His fever spiked once, reaching 101.3, and I'd sat beside him with cold compresses for 3 hours until it broke. Professional distance should have kept me detached, clinical. But there was nothing clinical about the way my pulse quickened every time I had to touch his bare skin to check the wound. I was dozing in the armchair, my third cup of coffee gone cold on the side table, when he moved. Not a gradual stirring into consciousness, but an explosion of motion that sent me lurching backward, chair legs scraping against hardwood. He was on his feet before I could process what was happening. 1 second unconscious, the next standing in a defensive crouch despite the sutures pulling at his abdomen. His eyes swept the room with terrifying precision, cataloging exits, threats, weapons within reach. Landing on me last, assessing whether I was danger or victim. "Don't move," I said, hands raised, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're going to rip your stitches." He swayed, gravity and blood loss catching up to the adrenaline. His hand went to his side where I'd sutured him closed, feeling the bandages, the careful wrapping I'd done just hours before. Confusion flickered across his face, quickly buried under layers of control. "Where am I?" His voice was rough from disuse, deeper than I'd expected. There was an accent there, subtle but present. Mediterranean, maybe. "My house. You collapsed in my garage 2 nights ago. I'm a veterinarian." I removed the bullet and closed the wound. The words came out clinical, matter of fact, like I was explaining a routine procedure instead of confessing to multiple felonies. He took that in, processing. His gaze moved to the IV stand, the medical supplies scattered across my coffee table, the blood-stained towels I'd been too exhausted to throw away, back to me, reading me with the same precision he'd read the room. You should have called the police. Not a question. A statement of fact about what normal people did when they found bleeding strangers. Probably. I stayed where I was, giving him space. But you didn't go to a hospital, which meant you couldn't. And you had a gun. So I made a choice. Something shifted in his expression, not quite softening but recalibrating. He moved back to the couch, lowering himself with careful control that couldn't quite hide the pain. Sweat had broken out across his forehead from the brief exertion. You need to lie down, I said, moving toward him. You lost a lot of blood. Your body needs rest to rebuild red blood cells. I'm fine. But he was already leaning back against the cushions, his body overruling his pride. You're not fine. You had a bullet lodged against your psoas muscle. If I'd been half an inch off with the forceps, you'd have intestinal perforation right now. I checked his pulse, timing it against my watch. Still elevated, but not dangerously so. And you've been unconscious for 36 hours, which is actually a good sign. Means your body was using energy for healing instead of consciousness. He let me check the wound site, lifting his arm when I needed access, watching me work with an intensity that made my hands less steady than they should be. The surgical site looked good. No signs of infection, minimal inflammation around the sutures. Clean pink tissue beginning to knit together. You're good at this, he said. I do it for a living, just usually with different patients. I'm grateful, truly. He paused, and I could see him weighing how much to say. My name is Christopher. Olivia. I pressed the edges of the bandage back into place, careful not to pull at the adhesive. Are you going to tell me why someone shot you, Christopher? I work in import and export. Sometimes there are disagreements with competitors over territory. The lie was so transparent I almost laughed. Import and export. Right. Like the kind that came in shipping containers with customs paperwork, not the kind that involved gunfights and crawling into strangers' garages. And the person who shot you? Are they going to come looking? No. Certainty in that single word. They think I'm dead. My men will have found the scene by now, seen the blood, assumed I didn't make it. Your men. I sat back, putting professional distance between us again. So not exactly legitimate import and export. His mouth curved, not quite a smile. Would you believe me if I said it was complicated? I'd believe that you're not going to tell me the truth. I stood, gathering the medical supplies, needing something to do with my hands, which is fine. It's probably better if I don't know. But I need to understand if I'm in danger, if someone's going to show up at my door looking for you. You're safe as long as no one knows I'm here. He shifted, testing his range of motion, wincing at the pull of sutures. How long do I need to stay? The wound itself needs at least 2 weeks before the sutures come out, but you should be able to move around carefully in a few days. I paused at the kitchen doorway. I have antibiotics. Veterinary grade, but they work the same. You need to take them religiously or risk sepsis. Understood. And you need to eat. Your body can't rebuild tissue without nutrients. I'll make something. I escaped to the kitchen, hands shaking now that the crisis moment had passed. He was awake, conscious, and somehow that made everything more real, more dangerous. A unconscious stranger was a medical problem. A conscious one was a choice I had to keep making. I made eggs and toast because it was simple, and he needed protein. When I brought the plate back to the living room, he was on his phone. Not the one I'd found in his jacket pocket, but a different one. Smaller, the kind you saw in spy movies. A burner. He put it away when I entered, but not before I caught a glimpse of a text message. Not in English. Italian, maybe, or something close to it. You had a phone this whole time, I said, setting the plate on the coffee table. Not one that matters. This is clean. Untraceable. He looked at the eggs like he wasn't sure what to do with food. My regular phone is probably in an evidence bag somewhere. The people looking for you. What will they do if they find out you're alive? Try to finish what they started. He picked up the fork, forcing himself to eat, despite clearly having no appetite. But they won't find out. Not from this address. You're not connected to my world in any way. I am now. Yes. He met my eyes, and there was something in his gaze that made my breath catch. You are. And I'm sorry for that. The next 2 days fell into an uneasy rhythm. I called the clinic again, extending my sick leave, and Dr. Morrison made concerned noises about stomach bugs lasting this long. I promised to see a doctor if it didn't improve. Another lie to add to the growing collection. Christopher healed faster than he should have. By the morning of the 3rd day, he was walking from couch to bathroom without assistance, moving with careful precision that suggested someone familiar with working through pain. His color had returned, the grayish pallor replaced by olive-toned skin that probably looked healthy when he wasn't recovering from nearly bleeding out. I changed his dressings twice a day, morning and evening, maintaining professional detachment that got harder every time I had to touch him. He had scars. Old ones. Silver white against his skin. A puckered circular mark on his right shoulder that looked like an old bullet wound. Linear scars on his ribs that could have been knife wounds. Evidence of a life lived violently. How many times have you been shot? I asked while cleaning the surgical site on the 3rd evening. Including this one? 4 times. He didn't elaborate, but I could see him counting in his head, cataloging injuries like inventory. Most people don't get shot 4 times and live to talk about it. Most people aren't in my line of work. And what line of work is that exactly? He was quiet for a long moment, watching me work. I could feel his gaze on my face, measuring how much truth I could handle. Security, he said finally, for a family business. Sometimes people disagree with our methods. Security doesn't usually involve getting ambushed and shot. It does in my family. I finished taping the bandage and stepped back. The wound looked good, healing clean and fast. No infection. Minimal scarring if I'd done the sutures right. He'd probably end up with a neat white line to add to his collection. Your family. Are they looking for you? Yes. He pulled his shirt down, covering the bandages. They think I'm in a secure location recovering. I prefer it that way. Better they don't know I had to hide in a civilian's garage. Pride? Practicality. The fewer people who know where I am, the fewer chances someone uses that information against me. He stood, testing his balance, and I noticed how he positioned himself between me and the windows, without seeming to think about it. Instinct. You've been kind. More than I deserved. Once I'm mobile, I'll leave and you can go back to your normal life. And if your normal life includes people trying to kill you, then I deal with it. But not here. Not where it could affect you. Something about the way he said it. Casual certainty that violence was inevitable. Made me realize exactly how far out of my depth I was. This wasn't some action movie. This was real. He expected people to try to kill him. Expected it enough to plan around it. Who shot you, Christopher? He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. And I saw exhaustion in the gesture. Not physical. Something deeper. The full name is Christopher Valentasi. My family manages certain business interests on the West Coast. Import, export, transportation, real estate. Some of it legitimate, some of it less so. He met my eyes. A rival organization, the Sinaloa Cartel, decided they wanted to expand north into our territory. I was meeting with one of my men when they ambushed us. My man didn't make it. I got lucky. Lucky. I looked at the bandages hidden under his shirt. You call getting shot and nearly bleeding to death in a stranger's garage lucky? I call breathing lucky. His expression was unreadable. I've seen what happens when the cartel wants someone dead and succeeds. So yes, I'm lucky. And grateful. You saved my life, Olivia. That's not something I take lightly. The way he said my name, careful and deliberate like he was tasting it, sent heat through me that had nothing to do with the medical care I'd been providing. I stepped back. Needing distance. Needing to remember that this man was dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with the gun I'd hidden in my hall closet. You need to keep taking the antibiotics, I said, defaulting to clinical professionalism. And don't push too hard too fast. Internal injuries need time to heal properly. Understood. He watched me retreat to the kitchen. and I felt his gaze like a physical touch. "Olivia?" I stopped, not turning around. "Thank you for everything. For not calling the police. For taking care of me. For keeping me alive. I won't forget that." I nodded, not trusting my voice, and escaped to the relative safety of the kitchen where I could pretend the reason my hands were shaking had everything to do with stress and nothing to do with the way Christopher Valentasi looked at me like I was something precious he hadn't expected to find. If I'd been half an inch off with the forceps, "You'd have intestinal perforation right now." I checked his pulse, timing it against my watch. Still elevated, but not dangerously so. "And you've been unconscious for 36 hours, which is actually a good sign. Means your body was using energy for healing instead of consciousness." He let me check the wound site, lifting his arm when I needed access, watching me work with an intensity that made my hands less steady than they should be. The surgical site looked good. No signs of infection, minimal inflammation around the sutures. Clean pink tissue beginning to knit together. "You're good at this," he said. "I do it for a living, just usually with different patients. I'm grateful, truly." He paused, and I could see him weighing how much to say. "My name is Christopher. Olivia." I pressed the edges of the bandage back into place, careful not to pull at the adhesive. "Are you going to tell me why someone shot you, Christopher?" "I work in import and export. Sometimes there are disagreements with competitors over territory." The lie was so transparent I almost laughed. Import and export. Right. Like the kind that came in shipping containers with customs paperwork, not the kind that involved gunfights and crawling into strangers' garages. "And the person who shot you? Are they going to come looking?" No. Certainty in that single word. "They think I'm dead. My men will have found the scene by now, seen the blood, assumed I didn't make it." "Your men." I sat back, putting professional distance between us again. So not exactly legitimate import and export. His mouth curved, not quite a smile. "Would you believe me if I said it was complicated?" "I'd believe that you're not going to tell me the truth." I stood, gathering the medical supplies, needing something to do with my hands. "Which is fine. It's probably better if I don't know. But I need to understand if I'm in danger, if someone's going to show up at my door looking for you. You're safe as long as no one knows I'm here." He shifted, testing his range of motion, wincing at the pull of sutures. "How long do I need to stay? The wound itself needs at least 2 weeks before the sutures come out. But you should be able to move around carefully in a few days." I paused at the kitchen doorway. "I have antibiotics. Veterinary grade, but they work the same. You need to take them religiously or risk sepsis." "Understood. And you need to eat. Your body can't rebuild tissue without nutrients." "I'll make something." I escaped to the kitchen, hands shaking now that the crisis moment had passed. He was awake, conscious, and somehow that made everything more real, more dangerous. A unconscious stranger was a medical problem. A conscious one was a choice I had to keep making. I made eggs and toast because it was simple, and he needed protein. When I brought the plate back to the living room, he was on his phone. Not the one I'd found in his jacket pocket, but a different one. Smaller, the kind you saw in spy movies. A burner. He put it away when I entered, but not before I caught a glimpse of a text message. Not in English. Italian, maybe, or something close to it. "You had a phone this whole time," I said, setting the plate on the coffee table. "Not one that matters. This is clean. Untraceable." He looked at the eggs like he wasn't sure what to do with food. "My regular phone is probably in an evidence bag somewhere. The people looking for you. What will they do if they find out you're alive? Try to finish what they started." He picked up the fork, forcing himself to eat, despite clearly having no appetite. "But they won't find out. Not from this address. You're not connected to my world in any way." "I am now." "Yes." He met my eyes, and there was something in his gaze that made my breath catch. "You are. And I'm sorry for that." The next 2 days fell into an uneasy rhythm. I called the clinic again, extending my sick leave, and Dr. Morrison made concerned noises about stomach bugs lasting this long. I promised to see a doctor if it didn't improve. Another lie to add to the growing collection. Christopher healed faster than he should have. By the morning of the 3rd day, he was walking from couch to bathroom without assistance. moving with careful precision that suggested someone familiar with working through pain. His color had returned, the grayish pallor replaced by olive-toned skin that probably looked healthy when he wasn't recovering from nearly bleeding out. I changed his dressings twice a day, morning and evening, maintaining professional detachment that got harder every time I had to touch him. He had scars. Old ones, silver-white against his skin. A puckered circular mark on his right shoulder that looked like an old bullet wound. Linear scars on his ribs that could have been knife wounds. Evidence of a life lived violently. "How many times have you been shot?" I asked while cleaning the surgical site on the third evening. "Including this one?" "4 times. He didn't elaborate, but I could see him counting in his head, cataloging injuries like inventory. Most people don't get shot 4 times and live to talk about it. Most people aren't in my line of work. And what line of work is that exactly?" He was quiet for a long moment, watching me work. I could feel his gaze on my face, measuring how much truth I could handle. "Security," he said finally, "for a family business. Sometimes people disagree with our methods. Security doesn't usually involve getting ambushed and shot. It does in my family." I finished taping the bandage and stepped back. The wound looked good, healing clean and fast. No infection. Minimal scarring if I'd done the sutures right. He'd probably end up with a neat white line to add to his collection. "Your family. Are they looking for you?" "Yes." He pulled his shirt down, covering the bandages. "They think I'm in a secure location recovering. I prefer it that way. Better they don't know I had to hide in a civilian's garage. Pride? Practicality. The fewer people who know where I am, the fewer chances someone uses that information against me." He stood, testing his balance, and I noticed how he positioned himself between me and the windows without seeming to think about it. Instinct. "You've been kind. More than I deserved. Once I'm mobile, I'll leave and you can go back to your normal life. And if your normal life includes people trying to kill you, then I deal with it. But not here. Not where it could affect you." Something about the way he said it, casual certainty that violence was inevitable, made me realize exactly how far out of my depth I was. This wasn't some action movie. This was real. He expected people to try to kill him. Expected it enough to plan around it. "Who shot you, Christopher?" He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. And I saw exhaustion in the gesture. Not physical. Something deeper. "The full name is Christopher Valentasi. My family manages certain business interests on the West Coast. Import, export, transportation, real estate. Some of it legitimate, some of it less so." He met my eyes. A rival organization, the Sinaloa Cartel, decided they wanted to expand north into our territory. I was meeting with one of my men when they ambushed us. My man didn't make it. I got lucky. Lucky. I looked at the bandages hidden under his shirt. "You call getting shot and nearly bleeding to death in a stranger's garage lucky. I call breathing lucky." His expression was unreadable. I've seen what happens when the cartel wants someone dead and succeeds. So yes, I'm lucky. And grateful. "You saved my life, Olivia. That's not something I take lightly." The way he said my name, careful and deliberate like he was tasting it, sent heat through me that had nothing to do with the medical care I'd been providing. I stepped back, needing distance, needing to remember that this man was dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with the gun I'd hidden in my hall closet. "You need to keep taking the antibiotics," I said, defaulting to clinical professionalism. "And don't push too hard too fast. Internal injuries need time to heal properly." "Understood." He watched me retreat to the kitchen, and I felt his gaze like a physical touch. "Olivia?" I stopped, not turning around. "Thank you. For everything. For not calling the police, for taking care of me, for keeping me alive. I won't forget that." I nodded, not trusting my voice, and escaped to the relative safety of the kitchen where I could pretend the reason my hands were shaking had everything to do with stress, and nothing to do with the way Christopher Valentasi looked at me like I was something precious he hadn't expected to find. I returned from the clinic on the 6th day to find my living room occupied by strangers. 3 men in dark clothing stood scattered around the space like chess pieces deliberately positioned for maximum tactical advantage. One near the window, another by the kitchen doorway, the third closer to Christopher, who was actually standing without support, near the fireplace. He wasn't the wounded man I'd been caring for. His posture had transformed completely, shoulders squared, weight balanced perfectly despite the healing wound in his abdomen. He wore fresh clothes, a black button-down shirt, and dark slacks that someone had clearly delivered. His hair was no longer disheveled, but styled back from his face, revealing the sharp angles of his features in a way that made him look older, harder, dangerous. This was Christopher Valentasi, not my patient, the man who commanded rooms and people with equal ease. My keys slipped from suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering against the hardwood floor. Every head turned toward me. The three strangers assessed me with professional coldness, cataloging threat level and dismissing me in seconds. But Christopher's gaze held something different. Recognition. Concern. Something warmer that shouldn't exist between a crime boss and the woman who'd removed a bullet from his gut. Olivia. He said my name like an introduction and a warning simultaneously. These are associates. They were just leaving. The man nearest to me, built like a linebacker with graying temples and eyes that had seen too much, opened his mouth to protest. Christopher cut him off with a single word in Italian, sharp and final. The tone left no room for argument. Whatever authority Christopher held over these men, it was absolute. They filed out without another word, though the gray-haired one paused at the door to give me one last evaluating look that made my skin crawl. Then I was alone with Christopher, the silence stretching between us like a chasm. "How long have they known where you are?" I asked, not moving from my spot near the door. "They tracked the signal from my phone about 4 hours ago." I kept it off for as long as I could, but I needed to make contact. He moved toward me, careful and measured, testing his range of motion. I told them I was recovering at a secure location. They wanted to extract me immediately. I convinced them to wait. "Why?" "Because the moment I leave, you become a loose end." He stopped a few feet away, close enough that I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands flexed at his sides. "My men know about you now, which means eventually, someone else will too." The floor felt unsteady beneath me. I bent to retrieve my keys, needing something to do with my hands. The cartel, among others. I have enemies, Olivia, more than I can count. And they're very good at finding leverage. He waited until I straightened to meet my eyes. "I'm sorry. I never wanted to drag you into this world. But I'm in it now. Not a question. A statement of fact that tasted bitter on my tongue. Yes." I walked past him into the kitchen, dropping my bag on the counter with more force than necessary. 6 days ago, I'd had a normal life. Boring, maybe, but safe. Predictable. Mine. Now there were men in tactical gear cataloging my address, my routine, my existence. "What happens now?" I asked, staring at the coffee maker like it held answers. Christopher followed, keeping that careful distance between us. "You have options. The first is protection. I can assign security to you, discreet but constant. They'll follow you to work, monitor your house, make sure no one gets close enough to use you against me. Living under surveillance." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Sounds delightful. The alternative is relocation. Complete identity change. New city. New life. My organization can handle everything. You'd be compensated financially for the disruption, and you'd be safe. Safe and alone in a place where no one knows me. Doing work I haven't trained for. Pretending my entire life up until now didn't exist." I turned to face him. "That's not a choice, Christopher. That's witness protection for a crime I didn't commit. It's survival. It's running." I gripped the counter edge, knuckles white. "I've spent 5 years in this house trying to hold on to what's left of my family, what's left of the life my parents built. The clinic, the neighborhood, Mrs. Patterson and her cat that hides in my garage. This is all I have. And you're telling me I have to give it up because you got shot and crawled into my garage? I'm telling you that staying here makes you a target." His voice hardened. "The cartel doesn't play games, Olivia. They'll take you, hurt you, use you to get to me. And they won't hesitate. Then maybe you should leave. Go back to your world and let me have mine back. It's too late for that. They already know the connection exists. We stared at each other across my small kitchen, the space that had always felt cozy, suddenly claustrophobic. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to rewind time to the night I'd found him bleeding, and make different choices, smarter choices, selfish choices that left him to bleed out while I called 911 and went to bed. But I couldn't, because despite everything, despite the danger and the fear and the absolute insanity of the situation, I didn't regret saving him. "I'll take the first option," I said finally. "The security. I'm not abandoning my life." Something flickered across his face. Relief, maybe, or satisfaction. "Good. I'll make arrangements." The next 3 days proved how thoroughly my life had been invaded. Men I didn't know followed me to work in unmarked sedans, parking in the clinic's lot and watching the entrance like hawks. A sleek security system appeared in my house overnight. Cameras and sensors and technology I didn't understand, but Christopher assured me was necessary. Even Mrs. Patterson commented on the nice young men who'd been around the neighborhood lately. Christopher stayed, recovering with alarming speed. By the 8th day, he was moving without visible discomfort, the sutures healing clean under bandages that needed changing less frequently. He should have left. His organization clearly wanted him back, but he kept finding reasons to delay. "I need to monitor the wound for infection," he'd said the first time I asked. "The security system needs calibration," he'd said the second time. By the third time, he just looked at me and said nothing, and I didn't ask again. We fell into a rhythm that felt dangerous in its domesticity. He cooked dinner most nights, elaborate Italian dishes that he prepared with the same focused precision he probably applied to everything else. Pasta carbonara with pancetta that melted on my tongue. Osso buco that fell off the bone. Tiramisu that he claimed his grandmother had taught him to make. "Didn't expect a crime boss to know his way around a kitchen," I'd said, watching him dice garlic with professional efficiency. "My nonna believed every man should know how to feed himself and the people he cares about." He'd smiled then, a real smile that softened the harsh lines of his face. She also believed in settling disagreements with wooden spoons, which probably explains my career path. We watched movies late at night, old films from my father's DVD collection. Christopher had opinions on cinematography and plot structure that surprised me. He quoted Coppola and Scorsese like scripture, pointed out continuity errors in mob movies with the authority of someone who knew exactly how that world actually worked. For stretches of time, I could almost forget, almost pretend he was just a man recovering from surgery, not a criminal whose phone buzzed constantly with messages that made his expression go cold and distant. Almost believe we were two normal people sharing space and meals and increasingly charged glances across dimly lit rooms. But reality always intruded. A call at 3 a.m. that he took in Italian, voice hard and commanding. A visitor who Christopher met at the door, speaking in low tones about shipments and territories. The gun he'd started carrying again, tucked into a holster at his back, where I glimpsed it whenever his shirt rode up. The breaking point came on the 11th day. I was at the clinic when my phone rang, Christopher's number on the display. "Come home now," he said without preamble. "Don't stop anywhere. Drive straight here." My stomach dropped. "What happened?" "Just come home. The security will follow you." The drive took 15 minutes that felt like hours. The unmarked sedan stayed close behind me, and I kept checking my mirrors for threats I wouldn't recognize if I saw them. My street looked normal when I pulled in. No cars out of place, no obvious danger. But Christopher opened the door before I reached it, pulling me inside with a grip that was just shy of painful. "They know." He shut the door, engaged 3 separate locks. "The cartel. They have your name, your address, where you work. Everything." I couldn't breathe. How? Someone talked. Or someone saw something. It doesn't matter how. He moved to the window, checking the street through a gap in the curtains. "What matters is that you're not safe here anymore. You said the security can be bypassed. People can be bribed or killed. There's surveillance photos, Olivia. You arriving at work, leaving the clinic, shopping at the grocery store. They've been watching you for at least 3 days." The room tilted sideways. I sat down hard on the couch, the same couch where I'd performed surgery on him a week and a half ago. where he'd slept and healed and become part of my life in ways I hadn't meant to allow. "I'm moving you tonight," Christopher continued, already in tactical mode. "Pack what you need. You're coming to my property. 40 acres, controlled access, security that actually works." "No." He turned, surprise cracking through his composure. "This isn't negotiable." "Yes, it is." I stood, anger replacing fear, because anger was easier to handle. "You don't get to make unilateral decisions about my life. I'm trying to keep you alive. By putting me in a cage," my voice rose, months of stress and fear and exhaustion pouring out. "First it's discreet security, then it's surveillance. Now it's moving to your compound like some kind of prisoner. Where does it end, Christopher? When do I get to make my own choices? When the people trying to kill you are dead or in prison?" He crossed the room in 3 strides, getting in my space, using his size to intimidate. It worked. "You don't understand what these men are capable of, what they'll do to get to me. Then maybe you should leave." I shoved at his chest, my hands meeting solid muscle that didn't budge. "Get out of my house, out of my life, and let me go back to being nobody." "It's too late for that." He caught my wrists, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to stop me. "The second I bled on your garage floor, it was too late. I should have let you die." I knew it wasn't true even as I said it, but I needed to hurt him the way I was hurting. Probably. His grip tightened fractionally. "But you didn't. You saved me. And now I'm trying to return the favor. I don't want your favors. I want my life back. I can't give you that." His voice dropped, something raw breaking through the controlled exterior. "I can't undo what happened. Can't make you invisible again. All I can do is keep you breathing. And I need you to let me do that." "Why?" The question tore out of me. "Why do you care? You don't even know me." "Because you saved my life when you should have called the police." His eyes were too dark, too intense, boring into mine like he could make me understand through sheer will. "Because you risked everything for a stranger. Because every time you change my bandages, you're gentle even when I know you want to strangle me. Because—" He stopped, jaw clenched, clearly fighting against whatever he'd been about to say. "Because what?" I demanded, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Because I care about you more than I should." The admission came out rough, reluctant. "More than is smart or safe or sensible. And the thought of the cartel getting their hands on you makes me want to burn down half the city." The silence that followed was deafening. We stood there, my wrists still caught in his hands, breathing hard like we'd been running. Everything I should say died in my throat. This was insane. He was a criminal. I'd known him less than 2 weeks. Nothing about this made sense. But when I looked at him, really looked, I saw past the danger to the man underneath. The one who cooked his grandmother's recipes and quoted classic films and said my name like it mattered. The one who'd thanked me for saving him with genuine gratitude. The one who was trying, however clumsily, to protect me from a threat I couldn't fight alone. "I care about you too," I whispered, "and I hate that I do." He released my wrists, one hand coming up to cup my face instead. His palm was warm, calloused, careful. "Olivia," I kissed him before he could finish. Before either of us could think better of it. Before logic and fear and common sense could talk me out of something I'd been wanting since the first time I'd seen him awake and whole. He responded immediately, his other hand sliding into my hair, angling my head for better access. The kiss was nothing gentle, nothing tentative. It was weeks of tension and fear and proximity combusting between us. His teeth caught my bottom lip and I gasped, letting him deepen the kiss, tasting coffee and frustration and something darker that I couldn't name. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against mine. "This is a terrible idea," I said. "The worst." His thumb traced my cheekbone. "But I'm done pretending I don't want you. We're still fighting about the security situation." "We are." He kissed me again, softer this time. "But we can fight about it tomorrow." Tomorrow. Like we had time for tomorrows. Like the cartel wasn't watching my house right now, planning how to use me against him. Like any of this could end in anything but disaster. But his arms were solid around me, and for the first time since finding him bleeding in my garage, I felt something other than afraid. I felt alive. Christopher's property sat 20 minutes outside the city limits, accessed by a private road that wound through dense forest before opening onto manicured grounds. The house itself was modern, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows that somehow managed to look both beautiful and fortified. I'd packed 2 suitcases worth of clothes and essentials, leaving the rest of my life behind like it belonged to someone else. "The guest wing is this way," Christopher said, leading me through spaces that felt more like an art gallery than a home. Marble floors, minimalist furniture, abstract paintings that probably cost more than my yearly salary. You'll have your own bathroom, closet space, privacy. Privacy. In a house where armed men patrolled the perimeter and cameras monitored every entrance. But I didn't argue. The alternative was staying in my house and waiting for the cartel to make their move. The bedroom he showed me was larger than my entire living room back home. A king-sized bed dominated the space, dressed in white linens that looked like they'd never been slept in. The attached bathroom had a soaking tub and a shower with more jets than I knew what to do with. "It's beautiful," I said, because it was. Also cold, impersonal. The kind of space designed for temporary occupants, not actual living. "I'll let you settle in." Christopher paused at the door, something uncertain crossing his face. "Olivia, I know this isn't ideal, but you're safe here. That matters more than comfort." He left before I could respond, footsteps fading down the hallway. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my suitcases, wondering how I'd ended up here. 3 weeks ago, I'd been a veterinarian with a boring, predictable life. Now I was living in a crime boss's compound, hiding from a Mexican drug cartel, and apparently falling for the man who'd dragged me into this nightmare. The next morning, I returned to work. Christopher had been adamant that maintaining my normal routine was important, that disappearing entirely would raise questions we didn't need asked. So I drove to the clinic with 2 of his men following in a black sedan, parking across the street where they could watch the entrance. "Doctor." Morrison commented on my improved health during our first break. "Stomach bug finally cleared up?" "Yeah, thankfully." The lie came easier than it should have. "Just needed some rest." "Well, you look better, almost relaxed." He grinned. "Got a new boyfriend or something? You're glowing." I laughed it off, but his words stuck with me through afternoon appointments. Was I glowing? And if so, what did that say about me that danger and Christopher Valentassi's proximity had the same effect as falling in love? The first real glimpse into Christopher's world came on my 5th night at the property. I was reading in the living room when rapid footsteps and raised voices erupted from somewhere deeper in the house. Christopher appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. "I need your help. Medical emergency." I followed him through corridors I hadn't explored yet, downstairs that led to what looked like a converted basement. A man sat on a metal examination table, his right arm wrapped in blood-soaked towels. He was young, maybe 25, with sweat pouring down his face and eyes glassy with pain. "Guard dog got him during a pickup," Christopher explained. "Tore through muscle. We can't take him to a hospital without questions." The man, who Christopher introduced as Ryan, nodded weakly. "Sorry, boss, I should have been faster." "Save the apologies. Olivia's going to fix you up." I approached carefully, unwrapping the makeshift bandage. The damage was extensive. Deep lacerations through the bicep, tissue torn and bleeding freely. I'd seen similar injuries in large breed attacks on other animals. This was bad, but manageable. "I need clean water, sterile towels, and my medical kit from upstairs," I said, slipping into professional mode. "Also whiskey. This is going to hurt." For the next 90 minutes, I cleaned and sutured Ryan's arm while Christopher watched from the corner. The work was familiar, grounding. Tissue was tissue, whether it belonged to a dog or a man. My hands moved with practiced precision, closing layers one at a time until the wound was sealed and properly dressed. "Take these twice a day," I told Ryan, handing him a bottle of antibiotics. "And keep the wound clean. If you see any signs of infection, redness, heat, swelling, you come find me immediately." "Thank you, Miss Olivia." He flexed his fingers experimentally. "You're good at this." After Ryan left with Franco, who'd appeared at some point to collect him, Christopher and I stood alone in the medical room. "You didn't hesitate," he said. "He needed help. That's what I do." Most people would have questions, concerns about treating criminals. "I treat animals who bite and scratch and try to kill me all the time," I replied. At least Ryan said thank you. Something in his expression softened. He crossed the room, standing close but not quite touching. "You keep surprising me. Is that good or bad? I haven't decided yet." Over the following 2 weeks, I met more of Christopher's world. Franco became a familiar presence. A man in his 40s with gray temples and eyes that missed nothing. He clearly disapproved of my involvement, but respected Christopher too much to voice objections. We reached an understanding based on mutual wariness. Thomas handled the financial side of the organization, legitimate and otherwise. He was surprisingly normal, talking about investment portfolios and tax strategies, like we were at a cocktail party instead of in a house protected by armed guards. Then there was Gabriella. Christopher's sister arrived unannounced on a Saturday morning, breezing through the front door with the confidence of someone who belonged. She was 22, studying architecture at Portland State, with her brother's dark coloring and sharp features softened into something gentler. "You must be Olivia," she said, looking me over with open curiosity. "Chris never brings women here. I'm more of a security concern than a girlfriend," I replied. "Right. Security." She grinned. "That's why he checks his phone every 5 minutes when you're at work and gets that specific look on his face when your name comes up." Christopher, who'd appeared at the mention of his name, shot his sister a warning glare. "Don't you have class?" "Not until Monday. I'm staying for dinner." She turned back to me. "I want to hear everything. How you met, what you do, whether my brother has been a complete caveman about this whole protection thing." Dinner with Gabriella was surprisingly normal. She talked about her classes, complained about professors, asked me about veterinary medicine with genuine interest. For a few hours, I could almost pretend we were regular people having a regular meal. But reality always intruded. Christopher's phone buzzed constantly throughout dinner, messages that made his jaw tighten and his eyes go cold. The cartel was making moves, attacking businesses associated with the Valentasi organization. A warehouse fire in the industrial district. A shipment intercepted at the docks. Small strikes designed to provoke a response. "They're testing you," Franco said during a meeting I wasn't supposed to overhear. "Seeing how you react. I know what they're doing." Christopher's voice carried through the partially open office door. "And I'm not giving them the war they want. Not yet." I listened from the hallway, understanding for the first time the impossible balance he maintained. Too aggressive, and he started a conflict that would leave bodies in the streets. Too passive, and he looked weak, inviting more attacks. Every decision carried weight, consequences that rippled through dozens of lives. The romantic tension that had been building since that first kiss grew unbearable. We slept in separate rooms, Christopher insisting on propriety, even as the air between us crackled with unspoken want. But there were moments. His hand at the small of my back when we passed in hallways. The way his eyes followed me when he thought I wasn't looking. Conversations that lasted until 3 a.m, sitting in the kitchen sharing coffee and pieces of ourselves we probably shouldn't reveal. 3 weeks after moving into his house, Christopher returned from a meeting that had clearly gone badly. I was awake despite the late hour, reading in the living room because sleep felt impossible. He came through the door with tension radiating off him in waves, jacket discarded, shirt partially unbuttoned, exhaustion and frustration carved into every line of his body. "Bad night?" I asked. "They hit another location. Killed 2 of my men." He poured whiskey with hands that weren't quite steady. "Good men. One had a kid, 3 years old." I set my book aside and crossed to where he stood at the window. "I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't bring them back." He drank, the alcohol disappearing in one swallow. "I should have seen it coming. Should have had better security. You can't protect everyone from everything. I'm supposed to. That's the job. Keep my people safe, maintain territory, show strength." He turned to face me. "But I'm distracted. Have been since you moved in. Can't focus when half my attention is on making sure you're safe. That's not my fault." "I know. It's mine. For caring more than I should." The admission hung between us, raw and honest. I reached up, cupping his face in my hands, feeling the tension in his jaw, the exhaustion around his eyes. Christopher. Just his name, but it contained everything I couldn't figure out how to say. He kissed me like he was drowning, and I was oxygen. Hard and desperate, his hands in my hair, pulling me closer until there was no space left between us. I kissed him back with equal intensity, weeks of denial and attraction, and fear combusting into need that wouldn't be ignored anymore. We didn't make it to a bedroom, ended up against the wall, then on the couch, urgent and graceless, and exactly what we both needed. His hands mapped my body with reverence mixed with possession, and I gave as good as I got, learning the scars and planes of muscle I'd treated medically, but never touched like this. Afterward, we lay tangled together on the couch, breathing hard, the world outside temporarily forgotten. "This complicates things," I said. His laugh was rough. "Everything about you complicates things. Regret it? Not even a little." He pulled me closer. "But we should probably talk about what this means. Tomorrow. Right now I just want this." He kissed my forehead, a gesture so tender it made my chest ache. Tomorrow, then. We fell asleep there, wrapped around each other, and for the first time since finding him bleeding in my garage, I felt like maybe we'd figure this out somehow. The clinic had always been my sanctuary. 10 years of working there, first as a student intern, then as Dr. Morrison's associate, finally as a full partner when he'd offered me equity last year. The scent of antiseptic and the sound of barking dogs meant home more than my actual house ever had. But walking through the doors that Tuesday morning, I felt the sanctuary crack. 2 men sat in the waiting area, surrounded by legitimate clients with their sick cats and limping dogs. They didn't belong. Everything about them screamed wrong, from their expensive leather jackets to the way their eyes tracked my movement across the room with predatory focus. Dr. Turner, the receptionist, Jamie, looked nervous. "These gentlemen say they have an emergency. An injured animal in their car." I forced my expression neutral, professional. "What kind of animal?" The older man stood, his accent thick when he spoke. "Dog, German Shepherd, hit by car maybe an hour ago. He's bleeding bad." Every instinct screamed trap, but there were witnesses. Mrs. Patterson sat in the corner with her orange tabby. The Hendersons waited with their Labrador. I couldn't cause a scene, couldn't let panic show on my face. "Bring him to exam room 3, I said. "I'll meet you there." I walked through the back hallway, pulled out my phone with shaking hands, and typed a single word to Christopher. Problem. Exam room 3 felt smaller with 2 strange men occupying the space. They carried a pet carrier between them, the kind meant for cats, far too small for a German Shepherd. My stomach dropped. "Set it on the table," I instructed, moving to wash my hands, buying time. The older man placed the carrier down with care that seemed genuine, but when he opened the latch, there was no dog inside, just an envelope. Manila, thick with contents I already knew I didn't want to see. "What is this?" I kept my voice steady through sheer force of will. "Open it, not a request." Inside were photos. Me leaving the clinic yesterday. Me at the grocery store 3 days ago. Me and Christopher through the windows of his property, close enough that whoever took them had been on the grounds. And underneath, printed on plain paper, a list. My full name, address, social security number, my parents' death certificates, the clinic's tax ID. "We know who you are, Dr. Turner." The older man spoke with disturbing politeness. "We know who you're protecting, and we need information." "I don't know what you're talking about." The lie tasted like ash. "Christopher Valentasi. When he leaves the property, where he goes, how many men guard him, which routes he takes." He smiled, and it was worse than any threat. "You live with him now. You see things. We just need you to share. And if I refuse, this clinic." He gestured around us. "Beautiful place. Would be shame if something happened. Fire maybe. Or maybe that nice girl at reception has accident on way home. Or maybe Dr. Morrison's granddaughter, she's 8, yes, walks home from school alone on Tuesdays." Ice flooded my veins. "You're threatening children. I'm offering opportunity for cooperation. You help us. Everyone stays safe. You refuse." He shrugged. "We find other ways to get information. Less pleasant ways. The door burst open before I could respond. Christopher's men, the two who'd followed me to work, weapons drawn. But the cartel men just smiled, hands raised in mock surrender. "We're leaving," the older one said. "Dr. Turner has our number. 48 hours to reconsider." They walked out past the armed guards like they were taking a casual stroll. By the time I got to the parking lot, they'd vanished into traffic. Before Christopher got there, I did the only thing I could live with. I pulled Jamie into my office, told her to take the week off, and had David arrange a quiet escort for Dr. Morrison's granddaughter on Tuesdays. I also filed an anonymous tip about 2 men casing a veterinary clinic with the local precinct, enough to nudge patrol cars past our block without inviting the kind of questions we couldn't answer. Christopher arrived 20 minutes later, Franco and 3 others with him. They swept the clinic for devices, questioned Jamie and the staff, took copies of the security footage. I sat in my office, hands still shaking, while Christopher paced like a caged animal. "They came into your workplace," he said, voice tight with barely controlled fury. "Threatened civilians. Mentioned Dr. Morrison's granddaughter by name." "What do we do?" I asked. "You don't do anything. You stay at the property where you're protected. I can't abandon the clinic. The animals need me, and disappearing suddenly will raise exactly the questions we're trying to avoid." I stood, facing him. "We need a different plan." Franco spoke from the doorway. "We could fortify the location. Cameras, armed security disguised as staff, monitor all approaches. Turn the clinic into an observation point," I added. "If they're watching me, we watch them back. Gather intelligence." Christopher looked at me like I'd suggested jumping off a bridge. "Absolutely not. You're not bait. I already am bait. At least this way we control the situation." The argument lasted another hour, but eventually he conceded. Over the next week, the clinic transformed. New cameras appeared in parking lot light fixtures. A new employee started, a man named David who moved like former military and always positioned himself near the entrance. Another patient waited in the lobby most days, reading magazines but really monitoring everyone who entered. The cartel's men came back twice. Once to check in, standing in the waiting area just long enough to remind me they were watching. Once to deliver another envelope, this one containing photos of Gabriella walking across campus. "They're escalating," Franco said after reviewing footage of the second visit. "Testing your resolve." Christopher wanted to pull me out entirely. I refused, partly because I meant what I'd said about the animals and the clinic, partly because something in me had hardened since finding him in my garage. I was tired of being afraid. The real breaking point came 3 weeks after the initial threat. A woman I didn't recognize brought in a German shepherd showing signs of acute poisoning. Vomiting, tremors, pupils dilated, classic toxicity symptoms. I rushed the dog into emergency treatment, administering activated charcoal and starting IV fluids while my tech assisted. During the exam, I found it. A small device clipped to the inside of the collar, hidden beneath fur. Not a regular GPS tracker. This was military grade, the kind Christopher's men used. I finished treating the dog, stabilizing him until the worst passed. Then I confronted the owner in the consultation room, door closed, David standing outside just in case. "Who gave you this dog?" I asked. "I don't. He's mine. Had him for 2 years. The device in his collar says otherwise. The fact that he was poisoned with ethylene glycol says otherwise." I leaned forward. "Who paid you to bring him here?" She cracked within 5 minutes. 2 men, Hispanic, offered her $500 to bring the dog to my clinic specifically. They told her to say he'd gotten into antifreeze. They poisoned him themselves. She'd watched them do it. But the money was too good to refuse. They said they just wanted to confirm you still worked here. She finished miserably. That you hadn't run away. I saved the dog. Kept him overnight for monitoring, called animal control about the woman, and went home to Christopher's property with a fury burning in my chest that wouldn't be extinguished. "They poisoned an animal," I said, pacing the living room while Christopher and Franco listened. "An innocent dog, deliberately poisoned him just to verify my location. What kind of people do that?" "Desperate ones," Christopher said quietly. "Or ones trying to provoke a response. Well, they got one. I'm done being scared. I want to help plan whatever you're doing next." I want these people stopped." Franco and Christopher exchanged looks. Then Christopher crossed to where I stood, taking my hands in his. "If you're truly in," he said, "there's no backing out. This becomes your fight too. You understand that? It became my fight the second I pulled a bullet out of you." I squeezed his hands. "I'm in. Whatever it takes." Planning a coordinated assault on 3 cartel locations took weeks. Christopher disappeared into his office for hours at a time. Franco and Thomas cycling through with maps and documents and burner phones that got destroyed after single uses. I caught glimpses of the operation through half-closed doors and overheard conversations. Warehouse coordinates, guard rotations, police response times in the industrial district, because even Christopher's organization had limits to how much law enforcement attention they could manage. He kept most details from me deliberately. Plausible deniability, he'd said when I asked why I wasn't included in strategy meetings. If something goes wrong, you can honestly say you didn't know. I saved your life, and I'm sleeping in your bed. I think that ship sailed. Humor me. He'd kissed my forehead, a gesture that had become familiar over the past month. Let me protect you in the ways I still can. For the next few days, the detail ran leaner than usual. Christopher had redirected 2 of the day shift men to cover a dockside handoff tied to the upcoming operation, and my clinic runs dropped from 4 bodies to 2. It felt fine, routine even, until it didn't. So I focused on what I could control. The clinic ran smoothly under increased security. I treated animals, filed paperwork, pretended the armed guards in the parking lot were normal. David had become a fixture, his cover as a maintenance worker so convincing that even Dr. Morrison believed it. 5 days before Christopher's planned operation, everything fell apart. I left the clinic at 6:30, later than usual because of an emergency splenectomy on a Labrador. The sun hung low on the horizon, that golden hour light that made Portland look almost beautiful. My security detail waited in their usual spot. 2 men in a dark sedan parked with clear sight lines to the clinic entrance. I was halfway across the parking lot when the van appeared. It came from the side street adjacent to the clinic, moving fast but not recklessly. Professional, calculated. The kind of approach that didn't draw attention until it was too late. The security sedan's tires exploded simultaneously, both front wheels shredded by spike strips that materialized from nowhere. The men inside scrambled out, reaching for weapons, but they were already too slow. 3 figures in black tactical gear hit them with what looked like tasers, dropping both guards in seconds. Not killed, just neutralized. I ran, dropped my bag, and bolted back toward the clinic, but arms caught me from behind, lifting me off my feet. A cloth pressed over my mouth and nose, chemical smell burning my throat. I tried to fight, tried to remember the self-defense moves Christopher had taught me, but my muscles wouldn't cooperate. The world tilted sideways, colors bleeding together. Then nothing. I woke to the mother of all headaches, pounding behind my eyes like someone was using my skull for percussion practice. My hands were zip-tied behind my back, plastic cutting into my wrists. Concrete floor beneath me, cold and gritty. The space smelled like motor oil and rust. Industrial decay mixed with something organic that might have been mold. A warehouse. Abandoned by the look of it, with high ceilings and broken windows filtering orange light from street lamps outside. 5 men occupied the space with me, positioned strategically around the perimeter. They spoke rapid Spanish, voices bouncing off metal walls. I understood maybe 1 word in 3, but I caught the important ones. Christopher. Money. Territory. Leverage. One of them noticed me stirring and called to the others. The oldest approached, squatting down to my level with a phone in his hand. He switched to English, heavily accented but clear. "Good. You're awake. Time to make a call." He held the phone up, recording video. Made me look at the camera while he explained in Spanish what they wanted, translating key points for my benefit. Christopher had 48 hours to meet their demands. Abandon the planned operation. Withdraw from disputed territories. Turn over control of 3 major shipping routes. In exchange, I'd be returned unharmed. If he refused, they'd start removing my fingers and mailing them to his property. The man seemed proud of that detail, like he'd come up with it himself. After recording, They zip-tied my ankles and left me against the wall while they settled into what looked like a long wait. I forced myself to focus, to observe instead of panic. Christopher had drilled this into me during those late-night training sessions. If something happens, stay calm. Notice everything. Information is survival. 5 guards total. They rotated in pairs, 2 sleeping while 3 stayed alert. 12-hour shifts based on when fresh men arrived with food and coffee. The warehouse had 3 exits I could see: main rolling door, side entrance, and what looked like a loading dock. Security cameras in 2 corners, but one had a dark screen. Dead or deliberately disabled, I couldn't tell. The guards kept checking their phones, monitoring something. They seemed nervous, constantly looking toward the windows like they expected company. Good. They should be nervous. Christopher wouldn't negotiate. He'd come for me, and he'd bring hell with him. Hours crawled past. They gave me water, but no food. Probably worried I'd vomit with the head injury I clearly had. One guard, younger than the others, almost seemed sympathetic. He loosened my wrist ties slightly when the others weren't looking. Gave me a folded jacket to sit on instead of bare concrete. "Sorry," he muttered in English. "Business, nothing personal." I didn't respond. Saved my energy for staying alert, for memorizing every detail I could about this place and these men. Somewhere across the city, Christopher would be receiving that video. I knew him well enough by now to predict his response. No panic, no negotiation. Just cold, calculated fury channeled into action. He'd accelerate the operation timeline, throw every resource he had into finding me before the deadline expired. The thought should have been comforting. Instead, it terrified me. Because I'd seen the maps in his office, heard Franco talk about acceptable casualties and collateral damage. Christopher would burn half the city to get me back, and people would die in the process. Good people. His people. Maybe even him. Night fell. The guards changed shifts. New men arrived, fresher, more alert. They brought food and beer, celebrating something in rapid Spanish I couldn't follow. One checked his phone and laughed, showing the screen to his companions. Whatever was on it made them all relax, tension draining from the space. That worried me more than the threats had. Relaxed guards meant they felt safe, like they'd won something. Around 3 a.m, the atmosphere changed. The guards stopped talking, started moving with purpose. More men arrived, at least 10 additional bodies flooding into the warehouse. They carried weapons openly now, AR-15s and tactical gear that looked military surplus, preparing for something big. One guard left the security camera unattended while helping unload ammunition crates. I craned my neck, catching a glimpse of the screen. The camera showed the warehouse perimeter, the empty lot surrounding us. And there, at the edges of the frame, shadows moved with coordinated precision. Too organized to be random, too purposeful to be anything but assault teams. Christopher. The explosion came without warning, a concussive blast that shook the entire structure. The rolling door blew inward, twisted metal and fire. The lights died instantly, emergency generators failing or deliberately killed. Chaos erupted in the darkness, shouting and gunfire from multiple directions simultaneously. I threw myself sideways, rolling toward the stack of shipping containers I'd been cataloging for the last 6 hours. The zip ties cut into my wrists and ankles, but I used core strength to keep moving, getting behind cover the way Christopher had taught me during those training sessions I'd thought were paranoid overkill. The firefight was brutal and brief. Christopher's men moved through the warehouse like ghosts, night vision giving them impossible advantage. I heard the cartel guards trying to coordinate defense, but they were fighting blind against opponents who could see perfectly. One by one, the gunfire reduced, until only screams and commands in Italian remained. "Olivia!" Franco's voice cut through the chaos. "Olivia Turner, respond." "Here!" I shouted from behind the containers. "I'm behind the blue containers near the east wall." Light flooded my hiding spot, tactical flashlight attached to Franco's rifle. He swept the area, confirmed I was alone, then lowered the weapon and moved to my side. A knife appeared from somewhere, slicing through the zip ties with one clean cut. "You hurt?" he demanded, checking me over with clinical efficiency. Headache. Dehydrated. Nothing serious. Can you walk? Yes. Then move. We're not clear yet. He half-guided, half-carried me through the warehouse, past bodies I tried not to look at, through corridors slick with spent brass and God knew what else. The exit led to Portland's industrial district, familiar enough that I knew we were only 15 minutes from Christopher's property. And there he was, standing beside one of the black SUVs, blood on his shirt, expression carved from stone until he saw me. Then something cracked, composure shattering into relief so intense it was almost painful to witness. I ran the last few yards. He met me halfway, arms crushing me against his chest hard enough to hurt. I didn't care. I was shaking, and he was shaking, and for a moment the war zone around us ceased to exist. You came, I said stupidly. Always. His voice was rough, destroyed. Always, Olivia. He held me while his men finished securing the area, while ambulances arrived for the injured, while Franco coordinated cleanup with contacts in local law enforcement, who'd conveniently show up late to file reports. I didn't ask how that worked. Didn't want to know. Later, much later, in the safety of his property with medical staff fussing over my head injury, Christopher told me the cost. All 3 cartel locations had been hit simultaneously with mine. The operation had succeeded beyond expectations. Cartel leadership was dead or captured, their presence in the region effectively eliminated. But 7 of Christopher's men hadn't made it home. 7 families he'd have to visit with condolences and cash that would never be adequate compensation. I'm sorry, I said, holding his hand in both of mine. Don't be. They knew the risks, and they'd do it again to bring you home. He pressed his forehead to mine. I would have burned every cartel stronghold from here to the border. Lost 100 men if that's what it took. That's terrifying. That's love. The aftermath of the rescue stretched into weeks that felt suspended between relief and reckoning. The Cartel de Sinaloa's presence on the West Coast had been effectively dismantled. 3 major locations destroyed. Leadership either dead or captured. Their remaining operatives scattered and leaderless. Christopher's organization had won decisively, but victory came at a price measured in coffins and grieving families. I attended all 7 funerals. Christopher tried to discourage me, saying it wasn't necessary, that these men understood the risks when they signed on. But I insisted. They died rescuing me, and the least I could do was witness how their families mourned. The 3rd funeral was for a man named David. Not the same David who'd been working security at my clinic, but a 26-year-old with a wife and infant daughter. His widow held the baby during the service, and when she looked at me across the cemetery, I saw no blame in her eyes, just exhaustion. Like she'd expected this outcome from the moment her husband chose this life. She doesn't hate you, Franco said quietly, standing beside me in the November chill. None of them do. They know how this world works. That doesn't make it easier. It's not supposed to be easy. If it was easy, we'd all be monsters. Christopher spent long hours over the following weeks consolidating power, establishing agreements with adjacent organizations to ensure the territory vacuum left by the cartel didn't invite new problems. He met with representatives from families I'd never heard of, negotiations conducted in Italian and English, and occasionally languages I couldn't identify. The dining room table became a war room, covered in maps and documents and burner phones that got destroyed after single conversations. I returned to the clinic 4 weeks after the kidnapping. Dr. Morrison hugged me so hard I thought my ribs might crack, then immediately launched into complaints about how behind we'd gotten on records. The normalcy of it, the mundane frustration over paperwork and appointment scheduling, felt like oxygen after drowning. The security remained, though. David, the real David who'd been posing as maintenance, stayed on permanently. Christopher had offered him double salary to continue the position, and he'd accepted without hesitation. 2 other guards rotated through shifts, always present but increasingly invisible as I adjusted to their constant presence. Patients didn't notice. Or if they did, they assumed the clinic had simply upgraded security after some incident. Portland wasn't exactly known for low crime rates. 6 weeks after my rescue, Gabriella showed up at Christopher's property unannounced, which seemed to be her preferred method of arrival. She found me in the kitchen making coffee, Christopher having disappeared into his office hours earlier for meetings I wasn't privy to. "We need to talk," she said, dropping her bag on the counter with the dramatic flair only 22-year-olds could manage. About? About the fact that you're living here, sleeping with my brother, and apparently got kidnapped by a drug cartel. She fixed me with a look that reminded me uncomfortably of Christopher. And nobody thought to mention any of this to me until I overheard Franco talking to Thomas last week. I poured 2 cups of coffee, buying time to figure out how much I should reveal. Your brother was trying to protect you, keep you separate from the dangerous parts of his life. I've been separate from the dangerous parts of his life since I was born. She accepted the coffee. He paid for private schools, made sure I got into a good college, set up a trust fund that means I'll never have to worry about money. He's a great brother, but he forgets that protection and isolation aren't the same thing. He loves you. That's why he keeps you away from this. I know he loves me, but I'm not stupid, Olivia. I've known what Chris does since I was 15. I just pretend not to because it makes him feel better. She sipped her coffee. So now I want the real story. How you met, why you're here, what happened with the cartel. I told her. Most of it anyway. Finding Christopher bleeding in my garage, the surgery, the recovery, how his world had swallowed mine piece by piece until there was no separation left between us. She listened without interrupting, processing information with the same sharp intelligence her brother possessed. You love him, she said when I finished. Not a question. Yes, and he loves you. Which is why he nearly burned down half of Portland to get you back. She set her cup down. Okay, I can work with that. Work with what? The fact that you're apparently permanent. Which means I need to stop treating you like one of Chris's random associates and start treating you like family. She grinned. Fair warning, I'm a terrible influence. Ask Chris about the time I got him arrested when I was 16. You got him arrested? Long story involving fake IDs and a very understanding judge who owed our father a favor. She stood, gathering her bag. But the point is, you're stuck with me now. Weekly dinners, occasional shopping trips, the whole sister-in-law experience. We're not married. Yet. Give it 6 months. She kissed my cheek. Welcome to the family, Olivia. Christopher emerged from his office an hour after Gabriella left, looking exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. I was reading on the couch, same spot where I'd performed surgery on him months ago, back when he was just a stranger who'd bled on my garage floor. Bad meeting? I asked. Necessary meeting. He sat beside me, pulling me against his side with casual possessiveness that had become natural over the past weeks. Finalizing agreements with the other families, making sure everyone understands the new territory boundaries. Is it done? The war with the cartel? As done as these things get. There's cleanup still, stragglers who need to be dealt with, but the organization itself is finished here. He was quiet for a moment. I'm pulling back. I sat up to look at him properly. What does that mean? It means I'm delegating more to Franco and Thomas. Means I'm stepping away from the day-to-day operations, focusing on the legitimate businesses instead. He met my eyes. It means I'm choosing a different kind of life, one where I come home at reasonable hours and don't have to plan military operations over dinner. Because of me. Because of you. Because I'm 34 years old and I've been doing this since I was 20. Because I've lost too many good men, and I'm tired of attending their funerals. He cupped my face in his hands. Because I want a future that isn't just survival. I want mornings and arguments about whose turn it is to make coffee, and maybe eventually kids who inherit your eyes and my terrible sense of humor. My throat tightened. You're talking about a life. I'm talking about our life. If you want it. I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago. Alone in a house full of memories. Working endless hours at a clinic. Because going home to emptiness felt worse than exhaustion. Existing but not really living. Just moving through days that blurred together into meaningless routine. Then I thought about the woman I'd become. Still a veterinarian, still saving animals, but also someone who'd learned to shoot, who'd survived kidnapping, who'd fallen in love with a man who ran a criminal empire, and somehow made me feel safer than I'd ever felt in my careful, law-abiding life. "I want it," I said. "All of it. The mornings and the arguments and the future you're describing." He kissed me then, soft and careful, like I was something precious he couldn't quite believe he got to keep. Outside, Portland rain started falling, that constant November drizzle that made everything gray and cold. But inside, in this house that had become home, wrapped in arms that had held me through fear and danger and rescue, I felt nothing but warm. "We should probably discuss logistics," I said when we came up for air. "Like whether I'm moving in officially or if we're pretending I have my own place still. You've been living here for 2 months. I think the pretense ship has sailed." "Fair point. What about the clinic?" "I'm not giving that up. I wouldn't ask you to. Your work matters. Saving things is who you are." He brushed hair back from my face. "We'll figure out the balance. Together. Together." 6 months ago, that word would have terrified me. Now it felt like the only thing that made sense. 6 months. That's how long it had been since I'd found Christopher Valentasi bleeding in my garage, since I'd made the choice that changed everything. Half a year of learning to live in a world I'd never imagined, of falling in love with a man who commanded empires and killed enemies, of becoming someone I barely recognized when I looked in the mirror. But the woman staring back wasn't worse. Just different. Stronger, maybe. More certain about what mattered. The weeks after my rescue had brought a strange kind of peace. Christopher consolidated power with methodical precision, establishing agreements with neighboring organizations that ensured stability. The Cartel de Sinaloa was finished on the West Coast. Their territory absorbed or redistributed according to negotiations conducted in languages I only half understood. Franco handled most of the logistics, allowing Christopher to step back from daily operations in ways he'd never permitted himself before. I returned to the clinic full-time. Dr. Morrison welcomed me back with complaints about backlogged paperwork and a waiting room full of anxious pet owners. The normalcy of it, the routine of examinations and surgeries and explaining treatment plans to worried families, grounded me in ways nothing else could. This was who I'd always been, the core of myself that even kidnapping and gunfights couldn't erase. The security remained, though. David was permanent now. His cover as maintenance staff so convincing that patients asked him for help with everything from parking advice to fixing the automatic doors. 2 others rotated shifts, always present, always watching. I'd stopped noticing them after the first month, their presence as natural as the clinic's familiar antiseptic smell. Christopher's organization revealed itself to me in layers. Not just the criminal enterprise I'd glimpsed during crisis, but the complex network of legitimate businesses, real estate holdings, and community investments that supported dozens of families. The violence was real, undeniable, but so was the structure that kept neighborhoods stable, that provided jobs when legal options disappeared, that protected people the system had failed. I found my place in that structure organically. When Christopher's men got injured in ways that couldn't be explained to emergency room doctors, I treated them. My veterinary skills translated surprisingly well to human medicine, and my willingness to work without questions earned respect that money couldn't buy. Franco stopped looking at me like a liability and started including me in conversations about security protocols. Thomas asked my opinion on investments, recognizing that my outsider perspective caught blind spots they'd developed through years of immersion. I became Christopher's bridge to normalcy, his connection to a world beyond territory disputes and strategic alliances. When tensions flared between his organization and a rival family over some perceived slight, I was the one who suggested dinner instead of violence, negotiations over wine instead of bullets. It worked more often than anyone expected. The real test came on a Tuesday in March, 3 months after my rescue. Gabriella showed up at the property in tears, her usual confidence shattered. A graduate student in her architecture program had been stalking her for weeks, following her across campus, showing up at her apartment building, sending messages that escalated from uncomfortable to threatening. The university's security had filed reports but taken no meaningful action. Christopher's response was immediate and violent in its intent. He had the student's full background within an hour: address, family members, daily routine, weaknesses that could be exploited. He was planning something that would solve the problem permanently, in ways that made my stomach turn. "No," I said. stepping between him and Franco, who'd been receiving orders. Not this time. He threatened my sister, and we're going to handle it, but not your way. I turned to Gabriella, who watched us with wide eyes. Do you have documentation? Texts, emails, witness statements? Some. But the school says it's not sufficient for disciplinary action. Then we make it sufficient. I looked at Christopher. Your organization has lawyers, right? Good ones who know how to apply pressure without breaking laws. Thomas, who'd been quiet in the corner, spoke up. We have an entire firm on retainer. Specialists in everything from contracts to civil rights violations. Get them involved, file formal complaints with the university, document every incident with legal precision, threaten lawsuits for failure to protect students. I was thinking out loud now, assembling a strategy from years of watching how the system actually worked. And Christopher, your resources can make things uncomfortable for the student without touching him. Lease violations at his apartment building you happen to own. Traffic tickets for every minor infraction. Legal pressure that makes his life miserable without crossing into criminal territory. Franco looked skeptical. That could take weeks. I don't care if it takes months. We're doing this right. I held Christopher's gaze. Trust me. He did. Over the next 3 weeks, we built a case that the university couldn't ignore. The lawyers documented harassment with legal thoroughness that made the school's previous inaction look like negligence. The student found himself under scrutiny from every angle, legal problems multiplying until his attention shifted from Gabriella to his own survival. The university expelled him to avoid the lawsuit we'd prepared. A permanent restraining order ensured he'd face criminal charges if he ever approached Gabriella again. No violence, no disappearances. Just systematic legal pressure that achieved everything Christopher's original plan would have, without adding bodies to his conscience. You were right, he admitted afterward, holding me close in the quiet of our bedroom. I would have killed him. Felt justified doing it. But your way was better. Your instinct is always to protect through force. Mine is to heal. I traced the scar on his abdomen, the surgical line where I'd saved his life 6 months ago. We balance each other. You make me better. You know that? You make me braver. Spring arrived gradually in Portland, the constant rain finally breaking for days of unexpected sunshine. Christopher and I established routines that felt remarkably domestic, considering who we were and how we'd started. I kept my position at the clinic. He managed the legitimate businesses while Franco handled operations requiring more discretion. We had dinner with Gabriella weekly, her gratitude for how we'd handled her situation manifesting in terrible cooking attempts and stories about her classes. Franco softened toward me after watching how I'd protected Gabriella. He started asking my opinion on conflicts before they escalated, recognizing that I saw solutions his years in the organization had blinded him to. Thomas included me in investment meetings, my medical knowledge proving useful for evaluating healthcare acquisitions the organization pursued as legitimate cover. I wasn't naive about Christopher's world. Men still died in territory disputes. Businesses still operated in gray legal areas. Violence remained the ultimate currency when negotiation failed. But I'd also seen the families who depended on the organization for survival. The communities kept stable by Christopher's presence. The complicated morality of a man who ran a criminal empire but loved his sister and kept his promises. One evening in April, exactly 6 months after I'd found him bleeding in my garage, I came home from the clinic to find Christopher in the kitchen. He was cooking, something elaborate involving fresh pasta and sauce that smelled like his grandmother's recipes. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter outside. Security cameras monitored every approach, but inside these walls it felt like home. Dance with me, he said suddenly, abandoning the stove. There's no music. Don't need music. He pulled me close, one hand at my waist, the other finding mine. We swayed slowly in the kitchen's golden light, moving to rhythm only we could hear. You saved me, he said quietly against my hair. That night in your garage, you saved my life. But you saved more than that. You saved something in me I thought was dead. The part that could still feel something beyond violence and strategy. The part that believed in futures instead of just survival. My throat tightened. You saved me too. From a life that was just going through motions. From being alone in a house full of memories with nothing to look forward to. But more of the same. We saved each other then. Yeah, we did. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. Thunder rumbled in the distance, promising the kind of downpour that had been falling the night we met. But inside, wrapped in Christopher's arms, I felt nothing but safe. We'd survived violence and kidnapping and impossible choices. We'd built something real from chaos. Something that looked like love and felt like home. He kissed me as the first drops of rain hit the windows, soft and certain, like he had all the time in the world to prove what I already knew. We were permanent. Whatever came next, we'd face it together, balancing his strength with my compassion, his world with my healing, his darkness with my light. 6 months ago, I'd been a veterinarian who saved a bleeding stranger. Now I was Olivia Turner, Christopher Valentasi's partner in every way that mattered, living a life I'd never imagined and wouldn't trade for anything. The pasta probably burned. We didn't notice until much later.